friends, just before we begin a television show, we always decide on the time at which we are going to quit. And you often wonder, well, how do you manage to finish on time? Well, I just keep looking at the clock, and then 2 or 3 minutes before the time is finished, begin to weave into a conclusion. Now, you have no idea how lucky you are that television always runs on time, because I want to give you this historical fact. There was a man, I will give you his name at the end, who on November the 28th, 1955, began talking in Kent, England. He talked until December the 3rd. He talked for 5 days and 13 hours, which is the record for continuous talking. His name, Fulton Sheen. Now, they say that women talk a great deal. The record for women is only 2 days and 14 hours. It was held by a Mrs. Clapp. She couldn't keep her clap shut. Well, tonight we are to talk on the subject of the meaning of love. What is love? Well, that all depends upon whom you're asking. To a psychiatrist, love is a libidinous instinct. He calls it an id. And it becomes interesting to him when it manifests itself in aggressiveness and jealousy and hate and anything that creates a psychiatric problem. To the novelist, love is interesting not when it is a virtue, but generally when it is a vice. Adultery, perversity, and so forth constitute the themes of many novelists. To a biologist, is nothing but an animal instinct that has been carried over into the human order. To a comedian, love is nothing but a lot of dame foolishness. You understood me correctly, didn't you? Love is really none of these things. Love is a feeling, a groping, a tasting, a sensing, and awareness of another. Love always refers to another, not just primarily to self. And here's where it differs from knowledge. Now, let me illustrate this. Very few of us ever think, how different is this process by which we know in relationship to that by which we love? Whenever we know anything, we always bring the thing or object which is known down to the level of our mind. That is why when a teacher is explaining something in class, he will always give an example. It is degraded in some way, simplified. But the mind always insists that it comes down to its level. Hence, when the eternal Word of God came to this earth, he spoke in parables, brought divine truth down to the level of the people. Now, love does not operate that way. As a matter of fact, love operates in just the opposite direction. For example, the object of love is something to which you go out. Now, here is the faculty of of loving is the will. When you love anyone, instead of dragging it down to your level, you go out to meet it. For example, if you love music, you do not write your laws of music. You meet the demands of music. If a man is in love with a lady who loves poetry, he doesn't talk algebra to her all night, if he's wise. You can immediately see, therefore, that the nobler the object that is loved, the better we become. That is why it can be said that the level of any civilization is the level of its womanhood. Because the nobler the objects that are loved, the nobler a person becomes. The greatest philosopher who ever lived, Thomas Aquinas, said that the least love of God, therefore, is worth more than the knowledge of all created things. Because the knowledge of all created things merely draws things down to our own mind. But when we love God, we go out in order to meet the infinite. So it is love that makes us really more than knowledge. Now the next point about love is this, that love is not just therefore the same as sex. Now, sex is one of the manifestations of love. But somehow or other today, the word love is not so often mentioned except in songs. And then have you ever noticed that they're always in the future? Never in the present. How happy we will be. I'll bake a cake for you to take for all the boys to see. And sex, however, in common literature today, too often is a substitute for this noble affection. Now, though it is one of the manifestations, it is not necessarily love. And let me show you the difference. Sex alone is really not interested in a person. Sex is really interested in self. And hence the carnal man will very often apparently and seemingly project his love to someone else, but he's not loving that other person. He's loving the pleasure that he finds in that other person, which is not the same. George Orwell, who wrote that remarkable book about the future of a communistic world called 1984, he has some people saying in 1984, you like it, don't you? I don't mean you like me. I mean you like it. The other person says, yes, I adore it. It was sex, not love. It. When the Soviet soldiers came into Berlin, they ran through the streets, the close of World War II. They ran through the streets shouting, I want a woman, I want a woman. They didn't want a particular woman. They were not concerned at all with the person. They just wanted something to satisfy their own ego. Hence the difference. You see what a good job my angel does in clearing the blackboard? And the reason he did a particularly good job is because this afternoon his halo was shined. You know the kind of shampoo he uses? Halo. This is a good chance for a commercial, isn't it? I bet they regret that. Well, Magic Kiss did his halo. This is the difference between sex and love. I mean, not sex as an expression of love, but just isolate it. Sex is a circle. Have you ever noticed that's the only thing that I draw well is a circle? It's not perfect, but I mean it's much better than the things I usually draw. But sex is a circle. It's bounded by itself. It looks only to itself. Love, on the contrary, is a cross. Stretches out in all directions. It's all embracing. Sex, to some extent, only to some extent, is like some of the statues we see of Buddha. Big, fat, sleek, well-oiled body, hands folded across the breast, intently looking inward, thinking only of self. And love is very much like sometimes the paintings or the statue of a saint, thin, wasted face, but eyes upward, peering beyond the hid battlements of eternity unto God himself. So love, therefore, by its very nature, is something that is concerned with the other or another, which brings us to this other question, namely the love of neighbor. Our blessed Lord said, love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, you might say, how can I like my neighbor? First of all, the neighbor isn't the one from whom you borrow sugar. The neighbor isn't the one who tells you that you're making too much noise at your party. He isn't the one that knows your affairs before you do. The definition of a neighbor is one who is in need, or else your enemy. So the question arises, I can't like everybody. And I got certain neighbors I don't like. And nothing in the world can ever make me like them. That's true. So here we touch upon the difference between liking and loving. Certainly there are things and there are persons you can never like, because liking is instinctive. Liking is an emotion. It's physiological. It's almost organic. It's biological. It's something over which you do not have great control. For example, you do not like olives. Now, I should tell you something I don't like, and I generally announce it once a year over television and over radio, so that if you ever invite me to dinner, you'll remember it. I don't like chicken. Now, nothing can make me like chicken. I'll tell you the reason why. People wonder why I don't like chicken. Well, when I was a boy, my father used to send us out every summer to a farm to work. He believed in hard work, for which I thank him. And the tenant farmer, very anxious to please my father, gave us chickens every day except Friday. So every morning I had to go out and wring a chicken's neck. I must have wrung thousands of chickens' necks. So when we hear the command, love your neighbor, love everybody, and love all of God's creatures, well, that's all right. You can love them. But you can't always like them. Well, what is love? Love is not in the emotions. Love is not in the feelings. Love is in the will. And because it is in the will, love is subject to command. To command. You can never be commanded, for example, to like pickles. But you can be under a command, as a boy is under a command, for example. Now, please go up and kiss your Aunt Sophie. Now, he doesn't want to kiss his Aunt Sophie, but he's under a command, and maybe he does it. So love is subject, therefore, to the will. It can be ordered, whereas liking cannot. And we're only told, therefore, to love the neighbor. And how does this love work itself out practically? Because you may not be liking all the time. It is by doing a good deed. Do good to them who hate you. And as we begin to do what we ought and what is commanded, we may eventually begin to love that which we ought. And that is how we gradually come to love God and to love the neighbor sometimes that is not worth loving. Does that mean I have only 3 minutes left? All right. I thought I had 5 or 6. I've got 3, so I get very nervous, and I have to change. No, he says 5. Wasn't that nice that I asked him? He put up 3 fingers. Now I have 5. Well, now I can tell you other things. See, he said, I'm off the clock. You see, I like him for that, and I love him for that. Now, our blessed Lord also said, you love your neighbor as you love yourself. How can we love our neighbor as we love ourselves? Well, there are certain times, for example, we like ourselves, we love ourselves, and other times we do not love ourselves. We do not love ourselves when we are hateful and spiteful and mean and uncharitable and when we do embarrassing things. And then there are moments when we do love ourselves. We love ourselves when we're praised. We love ourselves when we're kind to the poor, and so on and so forth. Now, how are we, therefore, to love the neighbor as ourselves? We are to love the things in him that are good, and we are to not love the things that are bad in him. We love the person. We may hate the sin, just like we love the communists, but we hate communism. And that was what was meant by loving the neighbor as you love yourself. Love the things that are good. And love even the person who does wrong. And by loving him, he may escape his wrong. That is why the church is always willing to accept the heretic back into the treasury of her souls, but never the error into the treasury of her wisdom. There are certain rules for loving. I will pass some of them over very quickly. One is, you can never love in a hurry. Love is never done in a day. You can hate very quickly, but love is slow. That's one of the tragedies of divorce. People do not stay together long enough to learn to love one another. And then a second law of love is that all love leads either to heaven or to hell. All love either puts us in touch with God or puts us in touch with the devil. When it's good, even human love, we feel that we're in communion with something greater and bigger and broader than ourselves. And when the love is illicit and wrong, we not only feel degraded, but feel that we have degraded that which we loved. And finally, love is best expressed in terms of sacrifice. Love does not mean to have and to own and to possess. It means to be had, to be owned, to be possessed. It is the giving of oneself for another. That is why we speak of arrows and darts of love, something that wounds. And the day that a man forgets that love is synonymous with sacrifice, he will ask, what kind of a woman was this to ask for a ring of gold instead of tin? The day that men forget love is synonymous with sacrifice, they will ask, what kind of a God is it who asks for mortification and self-denial? Some years ago, there was an article appeared by a very well-known writer entitled Cosmical Religion. He said that he could no longer believe in a religion of love or a religion of fear, but he believed in a cosmical religion, the adoration of the cosmos. And I wrote an article and answered him, and I said I could accept his cosmical religion if he would only leave the letter S out of it. And in developing the idea, I said, we can never love the cosmos. We cannot adore it. It's too big. It's too immense. And man can never love anything except that which he can get his arms around. And the cosmos is too big and too bulky. That is why the Lord had to become a babe in order that we might encircle him in our arms. Well, I said that on television, and a woman wrote to me, and she said, do you mean to tell me, young man, this was some years ago, she said, do you mean to tell me, young man, that I can't love anyone unless I can get my arms around them? I said, madam, that isn't my problem, that's yours. Well, I hope now that you understand love just a little bit better. All love on this earth is just a spark that comes from the great flame of love, which is God. Now that you've heard this telecast, perhaps you understand why I always end a telecast in exactly the same way. Bye now, and God love you.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees. The bishop wrote 94 books, recorded countless radio shows, and appeared on hundreds of network and syndicated television programs. His legacy is a treasure of joy that transcends time and helps us to believe that truly life is worth living.
I'm going to talk to you today about the Mass and try to make it clear to you if I can. I'm sure there are some young people here in this church who have said, oh, I don't want to go to Mass. I don't want to go to church. I don't get anything out of it. Do you know the reason why? Because you don't bring anything to it. Now, some of you boys, for example, I am sure have mothers who are not the least bit interested in football. You say, "Come, Mom, look at this game. It's wonderful." She gets nothing out of it. Why? Because she doesn't bring any knowledge of football to it. Think of how many people would not go to an opera. They would find it boring. That's because they bring no knowledge of music to it. Just suppose that you were suddenly put down in Athens, on the hill of the Areopagus. Would you understand it? Would you think, "Oh, this is where Socrates defended himself, and this is where St. Paul gave that great discourse to the senators of Athens"? You'd have to bring something to Greece in order to understand it. And so certainly you get nothing out of it, because you've made no sacrifice, no effort to understand what the Mass is. Very simply, what the Mass is reaching to Calvary and laying hold with your hands of the cross of Christ, with Christ on it, and you plant it down here, today. Whenever Mass is celebrated, we take the cross and we plant it down in Nairobi, we plant it down in Tokyo, we plant it in New York, we plant it in this city. That's what the Mass is, the continuation of Calvary. And in order to take a part in it, you have to bring little crosses. Our blessed Lord said, "Take up your cross daily and follow me." Everyone has a cross. For example, you young students, you've got the cross of spelling, of mathematics, and of obedience. When Mother says, "Do the dishes," that's a little cross. And the older people have different kind of crosses. And we bring all of our crosses here, and we plant them down alongside of that great cross of Christ. And we mass them all together under Him. That is the Mass. It has 3 acts. It's like a great drama. Just suppose that 4 or 5 centuries before Christ there was a great drama, because that was the great age of drama. A drama presented that moved hearts, purged souls, which a wise old Greek said was the purpose of drama anyway. But it was played only once. And if you were at that theater and your soul was bettered because you witnessed the drama, you would say, "What a pity. Everyone in the world should see this." How could that be done? Well, it could be done by establishing road companies. New actors, same lines, same drama, but appearing on the different stages of the world. Apply this now to the death of our Lord. This drama was played once. But the night of the Last Supper, our blessed Lord said, "I am going to prepare this drama so that it will be enacted all over the world, and hearts will be purified and souls purged." So He established road companies. As He said to His apostles and His priests, "Do this, repeat it." Same lines, same purpose, only the stages are different. We will now follow the 3 acts of the drama. In the first act, you offer yourself to Christ. Act 1. Act 2, you die. You die with him. Act 3, because you died with him, now you get new life. Act 1, where you offer yourself as the offertory. Act 2, your death with Christ, the consecration. And thirdly, rising to a new life as Holy Communion. Now follow me through these three acts. Act 1, you offer yourself. You bring yourself to Christ and say, I want to be one with you in your great act of redemption. When a Mass begins, the Lord looks out from heaven and he says, I can't die again in this nature I took from Mary. This nature is glorified. But Peter, Paul, Mary Ann, will you give me your human nature? Offer yourself to me, and I will die again in you, and let you pass through the same stages of life as I passed through. Now, how do you offer yourself to the Lord? Not just by being present, not just that, but by using symbols of bread and wine. So when the bread and wine is brought to the altar, you are brought to the altar. Why did our Lord say, bring bread and wine? Well, first of all, because no two substances better signify unity than bread and wine. As bread is made from a multiplicity of grains of wheat, and wine from a multiplicity of grapes, so we who are many are one in mind and heart with Christ. Then furthermore, when we bring bread and wine, the substances which have most traditionally nourished mankind, when we bring that which gives us life, we're bringing ourselves. And then we're also bringing part of creation. We're taking some elements out of creation, namely bread and wine, and we're saying to God, these are going to be wholly yours. And someday there will be a new heaven and a new earth. Everything in creation will be totally subject to you. But this is the first fruit of total giving of creation to Christ. So in the offertory, therefore, you become present on the altar. You are on the paten, you are in the chalice, under the form of bread and wine. That is your symbol. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons the collection is taken up at the offertory is to be a symbol of your self-sacrifice. It buys the bread and wine, helps the sacrifice. You see, if I were pleading for a collection, that's the idea that I would develop. But I'm not. But I merely want to indicate to you now that you're on the altar. That's the end of Act 1. Now we come to Act 2. You die. You are crucified. We cannot live to Christ unless we die to our lower nature. So our Lord now is representing his death at the consecration, and you are with him, so you die with him. Now I will tell you how that is done. First of all, how do we represent at the consecration of the Mass his death? Now think about this. How did our Lord die on the cross? By the separation of blood from his body. Here were great fountains, fountain in hand, right and left, fountains in the feet, the fountain of the heart.
And the very last drop of his blood came from his body with the piercing of the pericardium, the heart, so that our Lord was practically drained, therefore, of blood on the cross. And he died by this tearing apart of blood from body. Or as the Old Testament puts it, life is in the blood. Now, we reenact this death by the separate consecration of bread and wine. The priest does not say at the altar, "This is my body and my blood." That would be life. But first, "This is my body." Then over the wine, "This is my blood." That separate consecration of bread and wine is like a tearing apart, a rending asunder of blood from body, and that is the way Christ died on the cross. So we sacramentally reenact the death of Christ at the consecration. But you were with him. So you have to die with him. Die to that which is evil, to pride and lust and envy and gluttony, sloth, avarice. At the moment of consecration, therefore, you have to say the words of consecration in their secondary sense. The primary meaning of the words of consecration we know. This becomes the body of Christ, this becomes the blood of Christ. But there is a secondary meaning. And at the consecration, you should be saying, as every priest says, when I consecrate the bread and wine, I always have not only the intention of making present the body and blood of Christ, but I say to myself, as you must say, "This is my body. This is my blood. I care not if the accidents of my life remain, my duties, my avocation, my responsibility in life. These are species. Let them stay as they are, but what I am, substantially, body, soul, intellect, will, I'm thine, O Lord. This is the totality of myself. I die with you." That's the consecration. So you're dead with Christ. But no one ever dies to Christ without receiving new life. Now we come to the communion, Act 3. And this is one of the beautiful mysteries of communion. To understand it, I'm going to let you view nature. In the springtime, if the sunlight, the phosphates, and the carbons in the earth could speak, they would say to the plants, "Unless you eat me, you shall not have life in you." If the plants could speak, and the grass of the field, they would say to the animals, "Unless you eat me, you shall not have life in you." And if the plants and animals could speak, they would say to us, "Unless you eat me, you shall not have life in you." And Christ says to us in communion, "Unless you eat me, you shall not have life in you." And the law of transformation holds sway. Chemicals are transformed into plants, plants into animals, animals into man, and man into Christ. We now, therefore, have his life in us. This becomes, then, the great moment of love. We've died to that which is lower, Now we're going to have the higher life. And this higher life involves, as in marriage, lover, beloved, and love. The husband gives self to wife, the wife gives self to husband. Out of the lover being defeated by the love of the beloved, there comes the ecstasy of love. And what the union of husband and wife is in marriage, that communion is to the Spirit. The union of our soul in Christ, lover and beloved, produces the ecstasy of love. This, then, is the third act. It has another aspect which I will pass over quickly for a matter of time only, and it is forgotten aspect. When we study theology, it's hardly mentioned. In Scripture, it's mentioned constantly. And that is that when we receive communion, we have to bear this death of Christ in our lives. We constantly have to deny ourselves in order that the Christ life may emerge. Now see how nature represents that. If the grass and the lilies and the roses could speak, they would say to the air and to the sunlight and chemicals, would you like to live in me? I'm a plant. You're only crystals. Well, you can't live in me the way you are. You have to be changed. Die to yourself, then you live in me. If the animal could speak, it would say to the grass, you cannot see, you cannot taste, you cannot move from place to place. You cannot change from sunlight to shadow. I can. I have a higher kingdom than yours. Would you like to live in my kingdom? Not the way you are. You've got to be taken up from the earth, ground beneath the jaws of death, and then only can you live in my kingdom. To the animals we say, you cannot think, you cannot scan the heavens. I have a higher life than you. Would you like to live in me? Then submit yourself to the knife. Shed your blood. Otherwise you cannot live in my kingdom. So our Lord says to us, unless you take up your cross daily and follow me, you cannot, not you will not, you cannot be my disciple. Communion, therefore, is not only the taking in the life of Christ, as I explained. And incidentally, for the students of biology, let me tell you that the first process I described is the anabolic. And the sacrifice which I am now describing is the catabolic process of nature. So now in St. Paul, we have the second element of communion. St. Paul says, know you not that as often as you eat of this bread or drink of this chalice, you announce the death of the Lord until he come. So communion, therefore, is an incorporation to the higher life of Christ, but inasmuch as we have to go back into the world, we're going to take with him our death. This is the Mass. Do you know that I believe that when we go before the judgment seat of God, our greatest regret is not that we were more faithful to the holy sacrifice of the Mass. What a blessing is our faith. Now, I have no reason to assume, absolutely none, to assume that you good people are not at Mass every morning. Every morning I've been here, look at the crowds. Now, I'm glad to see that you people are attendants at daily Mass. This is marvelous. I wouldn't come back some morning, sneak up on you to see if you were here. I wouldn't do that. I just assume that you would be. Now, I hope I've made this clear to you, young people especially, what the Mass is. Always think of it as 3 acts. And how you are united with the cross of our Lord. But since I have been tiring to you, and even at the risk of keeping you a little longer, I'm going to tell you a story about the Mass and the Eucharist. This incident happened in China. A bishop was arrested by the communists, put in prison, and he told one of the missionary sisters, to whom he gave the tabernacle key, to remove the Blessed Sacrament from the chapel. It was on the 2nd floor of his house, lest it be defiled by the communists who would take over his residence. The bishop was in prison for 2 or 3 years. He wasted away to skin and bones, wore a black stocking cap, a black kimono, was too weak to stand. During the few moments of the day they were released from the prison. In the prison yard he had to be supported by 2 fellow communist, or rather Chinese prisoners. The nun went to the chapel, took the Blessed Sacrament, but she hid it in a loaf of bread. And as she closed the door of the chapel and was about to come down, a communist colonel came up the stairs and said, "I'm taking over this house. I have the key to the chapel." He tried to open the door and it would not open. He said, "Here, you open it." She said, "I can't. My hands are filled with bread." "Put the bread on the stairs." She said, "The stairs are dirty." "Then give me the bread." She said she reached him the Blessed Sacrament hidden in the bread with such reverence and fear that he laid hold of the loaf as if it might have been a baby. But he cocked a gun in case she should turn on him. And then he gave back the Blessed Sacrament. The nun was later on put in prison, beaten with rods, and underwent a kind of a bloody sweat from the terrific agony. Finally came the death march, and the bishop was put out in the march between 2 fellow Chinese prisoners. The communist colonel took a sack that was loaded with perhaps stones, weighed about 20 or 30 pounds, and tied it on the bishop's back, and then tied the rope in such a fashion that the weight would tighten the rope and he would eventually be choked to death in the march. But the communists would not kill anyone. The sister who told me this story was back in the line of march, and she saw the communist colonel tie this bag around his neck, and she broke the line of march, and she said, "Don't do that. Look at the man." It was a kind of an H.A. homo. The communist colonel looked at her and then at the face of the bishop and seemed to see pain for the first time in his life. And he called her a dog and told her to get back in line. She watched the weaving of the prisoners as they made their death march. And after a mile or two, she caught sight of the bishop, still supported by the two fellow Chinese prisoners, but the sack was not on his back. It was on the back of the communist colonel. I said, why did the communist colonel take it off his back, off the bishop's back? And she said, because he once carried the Blessed Sacrament. The last we know of that communist colonel is that he was put in prison for helping the bishop. The bishop died on the death march. The sister today is still bearing the effects of it. And this bishop in prison, she told me, used to read Mass. He was the only one in prison who was ever given wine. Not through any act of charity on the part of the communists. This was just divine providence making it possible for him to say Mass. And she said no Mass in the Gothic cathedral, surrounded by all the pomp of liturgy, could ever equal the beauty of this frail bishop, full of prison vermin and sores, leaning up against a wall with a tin tray and loaf of bread and a small glass of rice wine, moving his fingers over the tin tray and then pronouncing the words of consecration, and during the day secretly giving communion to prisoners who had pronounced the right word, the code word, which was the same code word in the early church, fish. Why fish? Well, the Greek word for fish is ichthus. And in our letters, I-X-T-H-U-S, ichthus. And in the early church, the I stood for Jesus, the X for Christus, the Theou of God, U for we are Son, S for Sator, Savior, Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior of the world. Then I could tell you, too, of the way that Mass was read at Dachau under the threat of the Nazis, and how priests underwent every kind of torture to make it possible to offer the holy sacrifice of the Mass. You're really assisting at Calvary. Realize its meaning. For there's a law that runs all through nature. We live by what we slay. Food that we have torn up from the earth. The animals that have been butchered. We live by what we slay. And through the marvelous paradox of divine grace, we who have crucified Christ by our sins, now through the mercy of communion, live.
Friends, this incident really and truly happened yesterday. I was coming down the elevator of a hotel, and alongside of me in the elevator was a big fat man. He said, "Father, it's cool tonight." I said, "Yes. It's the reason I wore my top coat." I said, "You don't have any on, do you?" "No," he said. I said, "You don't need one." And then touching his big fat body, I said, "You're well insulated." He says, "Father, I don't drink." I was once giving a telecast, and this will introduce this subject. And I had I was writing on the blackboard at the time, and in a certain home, a mother said to her little child, "You go into the front room and listen to Bishop Sheen. He's on television. He's smart. You'll learn something." Well, when he came in, I was just writing the word sex on the blackboard. He came out and said to his mother, "He's not so smart. He doesn't know how to spell six." So this is the sixth revolution. Well, that's what's being said, that we're living in a day of the sex revolution. I wonder if everybody went through a red light in traffic, if we wouldn't say we had a traffic revolution. And with all the dishonesty that's going on in business and politics, one wonders if we do not have an honesty or dishonesty revolution. And with the muggings and increase of murders, do we not have a murder revolution? In other words, we seem to say there's a sex revolution simply because, well, everybody's doing it. And since we are practicing certain things that are wrong, we've been inclined to label it sex revolution. Is it really that at all? I doubt it very much. There have always been revolutions of this kind in history. But I think instead of it being a sex revolution, it's a culture revolution that we have. Sex is merely the manifestation of a crisis that we have in our culture. Our times are those in which people are full of frustration, anxiety, fear, and dread. They're lonely. They've broken off all bonds with the eternal. And they find that this is one of the outlets. It gives them just a temporary release. Yes, there's been this kind of immorality in the past, but this difference between the past and the present. In the 14th, 15th century, there was a breakdown of morals. So much so that it brought on the religious revolution. So there's a breakdown of morals today. But in those days, people knew they did wrong. They didn't call the wrong right. Today, when there's a cancer, we call it health. Men stole in those days, and some of them were just as rotten as they are today. But they always believed in a moral order. And that's the reason when individuals fell, civilization did not. Now let me give you some suggestions to prove that this is really a cultural revolution rather than a sex revolution. First of all, it's a kind of a cultural revolution because this immorality among the young is almost a question of status. Status. Girls in colleges, in high schools, for example, will boast among other girls of their immorality, look down upon others who have not been immoral because they seem to put themselves in a superior position. Boys, in like manner, will boast of how many girls they have ruined. You see, the primary interest, really, does not seem to be in sex. If it were, they wouldn't take this attitude of seeking to achieve status. Oh, they're different, they're bigger. And they feel so uncomfortable, they show a disdain for anyone else. And then, too, from another point of view, sex has become very intellectual. It's talked about, it's written about, it's advertised as the subject of every film, book, and so forth. In other words, it has gone out of the area of the body and has got up into the brain, so that it has become an obsession. Now, sex of and by itself does not take that particular outlet. It's culture that takes that outlook and tries to intellectualize it. Just suppose there was a television show with this plot, advertised as striptease. And everyone is invited to this particular production. The lights flicker, grow dim, and is wheeled out on the stage by 6 or 7 men. A great and tremendous platter with a cover on it. Then blasts of horns. And then the cover is dramatically lifted off. And you see a piece of raw hamburger. Now suppose some people from India that are starving, and some people from the slums of Latin America came to see this show. And they said, this is an American production. They would say, what are you Americans thinking about? Haven't you gone wrong about your concept of food? Is that all that you think about? When you have to make food the object of teasing? It's exactly what they would say. They'd say the same thing, too, about sex. So I say it's a cultural problem. And juvenile delinquency and other manifestations of crime that we have, and the love of dope, this is just another phase of our cultural revolution in which our lonely, empty souls are trying to fill up the nakedness. And the final suggestion that it is cultural is the fact that there's so much perversity attached to this so-called sex revolution. The glorification of homosexuality, perverseness, murder is associated with it, unnatural crime. Sex doesn't decorate itself with those things, but a bad culture does. If men were really going back to the primitive, to the natural, to the primeval, they wouldn't so much surround it with these
cultural appurtenances. Now, this is a subject that's very difficult to talk about. Why is it difficult? Why, for example, do parents find it almost impossible to talk about it to their children? We say that, oh yes, we've got to have an education of sex. Yes. The argument that they use is, well, if you knew, for example, there was typhoid fever in a house, would you break into that house? So if we point out the dangers associated with sex, then the young people will not go in. Nonsense! There isn't a boy or girl in the world who's got an urge to break down a front door where there's a typhoid patient and break in. But he has a drive, he has an urge. That must be understood in a different way. We said some years ago, oh, there's too much prudery. Let's bring it out into the open. We'll have no more trouble. Well, we brought it out in the open. Now we have a lot of trouble. Why is it so difficult? Well, what is the nature of sex? Sex has a double element. Sex is a mystery. What is the known thing about sex? Well, the known thing is that everybody's male or female. So there is something that is physical about it. And there's also something that is non-physical, and we're going to call it spiritual. You can use another word if there's a prejudice against the word spiritual. And the spiritual is that sex is hidden in some way in a deep personal love. It is related to one person. It is an almost incommunicable moment. That peculiar experience where something that lies too deep for words is given in a wordless way. Now, this physical element you can talk about. Because it's known, it's there. Now we answer our question, why is it so difficult for parents to talk to children about it? It's difficult because the children can understand, be told, physiological process just as they can be told about digestion. But there's something that the children cannot understand, and the parents find it impossible to communicate to them, and that is that how this thing is related to a profound, abiding love. Until they get into that lawful union with all of its ineffable moments, they cannot understand it. That's why it's hard. And to reduce this, the physical side of it, to something just like eating is nonsense. Why is it, for example, people do not mind eating in public? Because it's not personal. It hasn't that invisible spiritual element that love has. And that's the reason we're disgusted at seeing lovemaking in public. Because it takes that which is personal and makes it common, subjects it to what the Latins call the vulgus, the crowd. Something remotely like it comes. There comes a moment in the life of every boy, when he just gets tired of his mother putting a handkerchief up to his nose and say, "Blow hard." That day, the boy's a man. There are certain things every man must do for himself. Blow his own nose, make his own love. And so he wants to take it out of this common aspect that involves anybody that comes up with a handkerchief and says, "Blow hard." Now, when we just communicate this, the physical, and we leave out the spiritual and the atmosphere of love, well, when we do that, then we have children saying, "Well, there's no difference between a boy and a girl, and between animals. After all, do not they have identically the same physiological processes? And since we're just animals, and who doesn't get that impression simply by treating the physical? Since we're just animals, why not act like an animal? If we came from the beast, well, let's act like beasts. And that justification is what you generally hear because it has been isolated from the mysterious side. Now, even is that true? That it is just physical and we just do what comes naturally? Now, really, is that true? Animals mate only in season. Man doesn't. That's the first difference. Therefore, this mating process has been taken out of the realm of the automatic and the physiological. And it's brought into the area of freedom. It involves the intellect, understanding, choice, all those things which are so characteristic of man. That is one of the reasons why rape is so evil. It deprives the other person of freedom. They're not animals. Why a girl on the street would object to any man coming up and throwing her arms around her. Why? Because she's a free being. She's not a cow. She's captain and master of her own fate and destiny. She has a soul. She's got freedom, and she's going to use it a little bit differently than the beasts of the field. You know, as I look ahead in my mind as to what I had to treat in this telecast really should last about an hour. I've only got 2 or 3 minutes yet, 2.5 minutes. So I will have to pull it in and not be able to finish it all.
which will make you very curious because you will say, I wonder what he intended to say. That's the part you will enjoy more than anything else, and what I didn't say. Oh, I would have loved to have heard. That's the first reason why it's not purely animal. And then secondly, let me say to you boys, you young men, say it's just animal, that's all, purely biological, physiological. If that's so, why do you get mad at another boy who does the same thing to your sister? Why do you say, she's my sister? If she's an animal, does that make any difference? Someone on the street rapes your mother. What difference if she's an animal? Do I have a minute or a minute and 30 seconds? Minute and a half, thank you. And so the boy instinctively knows very well that there's a difference, that they're not beasts. And so I say in conclusion to you young men and women, do not be taking a torch and throwing it into a city and burning it and destroying it simply because you like to see ashes and debris and filth. What kind of human beings are we? If that's the way we spend our life, destroying cities and disrespecting the art, the culture, the buildings, the science, and all the beautiful things that are in this city. And every other person is a city, and that city is made to the image and likeness of God.
Bishop Sheen will return in a moment.
Fulton J. Sheen is indeed a man for all seasons. He walked a paced beat, allowing us to glimpse his nature and ponder its worth and to enjoy its presence. Bishop Sheen authored over 90 books. He broadcast countless radio and television programs and ministered in many parts of the world to people of every belief. As he said many times, it is not a unity of religion we plead for, but a unity of religious people. We may not be able to meet in the same pew, but we can meet on our knees.
I didn't have time to develop everything I intended to in that telecast, but now I do have time to say, bye now, and God love you. The title has been announced, The Stranger Within. I changed the title just a few minutes before I came on not the general subject. When I planned the telecast, I thought I might call it, Who Am I? But I didn't like to put it in the form of a question, because sometimes questions get you into trouble. G.K. Chesterton was once interviewed, along with a number of other famous authors. And it was one of those typical questions that are sometimes presented to authors, namely, if you were shipwrecked on an island, and you could have only one book, which book would you choose? Some said Shakespeare. Others said the Bible. Chesterton answered, Thomas's Practical Guide to Shipbuilding. And I remember, too, I was once giving a lecture in a hall, and I was talking about not getting down in the mouth and so forth. And I mentioned Jonas, and someone heckled me for the audience and said, how was Jonas in the belly of the whale for 3 days? That was another question. I said, I don't know. I said, when I get to heaven, I will ask Jonas. He said, suppose Jonas isn't there. Well, I said, then you ask him. So this question, who am I, really figured in one of the great Broadway plays of a few years ago, when a character met a violent death. His father said of him, he didn't know who he was. There's a kind of an amnesia that is going on in the world as regards human personalities. They are lost persons. They never enter themselves to ask, well, who am I? Do you remember reading that famous book of George Orwell called 1984? Orwell looked forward to that year when the world would be to a great extent under communist domination, and he said that we would be full of what he called unpersons. The kind that just drop out of existence, like sometimes Soviet dictators. And we are, as a matter of fact, today almost made intelligible in forms of numbers, because we are asked, what is your telephone number? What is your license number? What is your social security number? What's the number of the street in which you live? And so on and so forth. William J. White, in his book Organization Man, says that we are today all enveloped in organizations and groups, so that our personality is completely lost. We know not who we are. Maybe some of us are just like oranges. We can be substituted. I don't like this one, I'll take that one. Or maybe we're like oranges that are squeezed, in which the personality is ground out of us in order to make the collective orange juice of the totalitarian state. So we hate to be different, to be out of step, follow the crowd. Everybody's doing it. Even the children will say to their mothers, but Mom, everybody's wearing them. Well,
when is it that we ever become conscious of ourselves? And answer that question. Now, I'm going to be very dry, or a little drier than usual for a moment, to talk about two German philosophers. Now, the reason I talk about philosophers this way and say they are German is in order to make you realize that I am learned. You see, if I didn't mention German philosophers, you would think, well, he doesn't know anybody we don't know. So there must come moments in every telecast when one puts on this air of learning. Well, this German philosopher, rather a sad one he was, too. Heidegger. Heidegger said, one thing that makes us face ourselves is death. Because he said there is something opposite us, which is non-existence. And in the face of that, I must inquire about myself. And another German philosopher, equally sad, was Jaspers. Jaspers said, there are boundary situations, too. Grief, agony, worry, fear, dread. All of these things, he says, make us ask, well, what's it all about? What role do I play in this drama? But I think quite beyond the seriousness of these German philosophers, there are other things, too, that make us forced to answer the question, and that is sometimes our satiety and our boredom. You know, that's going to be one of the effects of our era of carnality, is boredom, fed-upness. If there was anyone who ever knew the excesses of a life of carnality, it was Lord Byron, a great poet. Remember the lines he wrote? My years are in the yellow leaf. The flowers and blooms of love are gone. The worm, the canker, and the grief are mine alone. There was a young man who went to see a Parisian psychiatrist a few years ago, and this young man said to him, I'm bored with life. I don't know why I'm here, what I'm doing. And the psychiatrist said, did you ever hear of Grimaldi? Yes, he said. Now he says, there is a man who's the leader of Café Society in Paris. Everybody knows him. He's the one who knows how to get fun out of life. He knows why he exists. You go to see Grimaldi and ask him. He will tell you. And the young man said, I am Grimaldi. Now we come to a kind of a new phase in this inquiry. All the while that we suffer these boundary situations, we feel that there's someone within us, a stranger within. We feel dual. There's a civil war going inside of us. Two opposing forces. As one professor put it, there's a me and there's a PhD. And even the old Latin Virgil poet put it, I see and I approve the better things of life. The worse things of life I follow. He knew this conflict that was inside of him. And so each and every person almost feels at times that there's a kind of a judge out there seated in judgment. And we have a sensation of praise and a sensation of blame. And this is quite independent of what anybody around us thinks. Oh, everybody else around us can say, that's right, and we know it's wrong. Or that's wrong, and we know it's right. There's a stranger inside. How to describe this stranger is rather difficult. There was a farmer who did a lot of corn stealing from the cribs of other farmers, and he took his son along. And he put the son as a lookout. And he said to his son before he started stealing the corn, "Did you look up the road?" "Yes," said the boy. "Did you look down the road?" "Yes." "Anybody coming?" "No." The boy said, "But Dad, you better look up." And that's it. One has the feeling that someone is looking. Who this someone is, we do not know. But someone is looking. Someone sees. There were two brothers who owned a grocery store, and there was a lot of pilfering going on. So they dug a hole in the ceiling, and then they circulated around the town that they always had somebody looking down from a hole in the ceiling. Do you know that after a short time, stealing stopped? And it was surprising to see the number of people that would come in, and as soon as they would enter the store, they would look up. Well, that's what this stranger is within. We all have it, everyone in varying degrees. I can remember when I was in college. Here was one where it was almost though the stranger without. We had night prayers about 8 o'clock, and we all went into the chapel, and hardly any lights in the chapel. And one night, one of the boys filled the holy water font with ink. So when every boy went in, put his finger in the ink, blessed himself in the dark, couldn't tell it. So during the prayers, of course, the prefect looked out and he saw black marks on every forehead, and he said to all the boys, "Everybody out." So he lined everybody up. There was only one who didn't have the mark on the forehead. And I also know of a girls' college where there was a party one night, and all of the college girls got together in the big fancy parlor where only rich visitors are allowed. Well, the next morning there were cake crumbs and soft drink bottles and everything scattered around the room. And the prefect, the next day, had all of the college girls walk by the parlor. And she pulled out 8 of them. And these 8 looked in the room as they went by. No one else looked. They gave themselves away. They had been in there the night before. And now to describe this stranger within, perhaps the best way is to say that there's an encounter that goes on inside of us. We're meeting someone. They, yes. Not always a sense of presence, but a kind of a sense of absence. We feel like a broken bone. When a bone is not where it ought to be, it hurts. And so too, when the mind and the conscience is not exactly where it ought to be, it gives a kind of a pain. And the stranger within is meeting us. Now, what's the nature of this encounter? Well, let me tell you the story of an encounter, and historical fact. And we will come to the names as we unfold the story. Once upon a time, there was a young man who was a knave, a deceiver, a charlatan, a crook, and a double-crosser. He cooperated with his mother in a great lie. He cheated his brother. He cheated his uncle. And he seemed to forget all about it. But because his brother was in pursuit of him, he ran away to another country. His name was Jacob. And he stayed there for 20 years. And then he starts back. And all of the ghosts that he thought were buried now began to appear, because he heard that his brother was coming out with an army of 400 men to meet him. And he was afraid. His brother was Esau. He knew he had done his brother wrong. So, still the crook, what does he do? He sends on the other side of the river hundreds of sheep and cattle, 11 of his sons, not all of them, just 11. 11 of his sons, 2 of his wives, not all of them, and some of his servants, and he said, if my brother asks what you're doing here, you say, all of these are gifts for you. I love you so much. So he lays down now to sleep. And he has a dream. It was a curious dream. It was about a wrestling match. Maybe it was all in the dream, maybe it was only in his conscience, maybe it was real, but at any rate, he was wrestling. And this one with whom he was wrestling was a stranger, and they wrestled on through the night. There was an encounter with himself and with his conscience. And in this wrestling match, Jacob was wounded in the thigh. This nature that he thought was so self-sufficient, which made him so complacent because he was a trickster, now it's weakened. He had trusted in himself, and now he has to limp. But the wrestling match still goes on. And finally the wrestler says to him, What is your name? In other words, who are you? Face up to yourself. Answer the question, who am I? He said, my name is Jacob. He saw himself. Jacob, the supplanter, the crook. In this wrestling match, suddenly there was an encounter with himself. He saw himself as it really was, but at the same time opposite this wrestler. And the wrestler says to him, your name is no longer Jacob. Your name is Israel. Israel. One who struggled with God. He was in an encounter with this stranger within. And here he's being praised for it and being told, now you know the stranger. Now you know the name of the wrestler. Now you know the one that you'll meet tonight. And Jacob then makes bold to say, and what is your name? No answer. No answer. Why not? Why should not this wrestler tell his name? Well, because when you name anything, you seem to have a complete understanding of all that it is. You name a plant, you name a person. Oh yes, I know him, I know her, I know it. And if this great wrestler had named himself, there would have been a kind of a total comprehension of all that he was. Refusing to name himself, Jacob had to learn that here he was face to face with a great unknown, something incomprehensible, something that we meet in awe, in loneliness, and in fear. In other words, this stranger cannot be completely and totally comprehended. And Jacob finally came to know that this was wisdom within, and the wrestler said to him, let me go now, for the day is breaking. Why, if he was so strong that he was able to wound Jacob, did he ask to let him go? Because the wrestler's name was God. That is the stranger within. And he never stays unless we bid him to stay. In other words, there are two classes of people in the world. Those who feel the presence of God and those who feel his absence as the stranger within.
The Scriptures tell us, with God all things are possible. Also, our faith can move mountains. Faith is a wellspring of wisdom that flows within our spirit. In this portrait of God's beauty, our faith must be taller than the tallest tree. It should reach above and beyond the highest snow peaks. Our faith is God's best gift to us. It is salvation. It is peace. It is truth. Jesus tells us we must have the faith of children to enter the kingdom of heaven. Jesus touched people as he healed them, and as many as touched him, he made whole.
I must tell you about a brother of mine who's a doctor here in New York, in order to illustrate a certain point I wish to get over. When we were children, we used to visit every Sunday afternoon an old couple whom we were taught to call familiarly Uncle Bill and Aunt Hannah. And in the course of the visit, my young brother Tom always used to ask Uncle Bill for a dime. He started this whole affair. Except he grew out of it. And one day my mother said to him, "Now, Tom, the next time we visit Uncle Bill, please do not ask him for anything. They're very poor, and they can ill afford to give you a dime. Now, will you promise, Mother, that you will not ask?" And he said, "I promise." We made the visit the following Sunday. Tom was very good, but just as we were driving away, he said, "Uncle Bill, you know." Now, the only point of the story that I wish to get across is that those of you who are knowing and loving will know what I mean when I say, thanks, thanks, thanks. May the Lord bless you. The burden of this telecast is to be the meaning of Christmas, but in order to do it, we must give you some philosophies of life. Chesterton once said that a philosophy of life was extremely important. He said that when you go to visit a dentist, before the dentist begins to drill your tooth, he has a right to ask you, what is your philosophy of life? Because if your philosophy of life is wrong, he can't be sure that you will pay your bill. An old wise Socrates once said, "Marry. If your wife is good, you'll be happy. If she's an old shrew, you will become a philosopher." Socrates became a philosopher. There are only two philosophies of life, basically. And one philosophy of life is this. It is that of man who goes to perfection or happiness or God by and through his own efforts. This is the philosophy, for example, of Buddhism, Confucianism, Taoism, philosophy of the ancient Greeks. One reached happiness, it was assumed, by contemplating the gods, or as the Eastern religions still believe, by some form of ascesis and self-discipline, by which, for example, in the Eightfold Path of Buddha, you crush all desires and eventually achieve some kind of perfection. This happens to be the philosophy of many today who have a queer kind of psychologism, which often goes by the name, wrongly enough, of Christianity. They hope that by rearranging their mental states, or by passing on torches to fellow man, or by doing something fairly good in the natural order, that they will attain some kind of perfection. Now, that philosophy of life is actually not very solid. And the reason it is not is because we have to recognize that we cannot lift ourselves by our own bootstraps. Cannot lift ourselves by the lobes of our ears. And we all know that barbarism is not something that is behind us. It is something that is beneath us. We know that there is a beast that dwells within us, and at any moment that beast might break loose. Furthermore, there's a limit to what we can know. And even when we do know, we have enough moral codes. We are powerless to do. There is nothing that gives man such a jolt as being thrown back on his own resources. So there's another philosophy of life. And it is just the opposite. Instead of man going up this way to God, it operates this way. God comes down to man. And this is the true, valid experience of the soul. For the soul responds to something rather than takes the initiative. There's a world of difference between the two. Here all the initiative is on the part of man. Here man responds to something. We too often think, for example, that, well, if we have a little spark of love, that God will show himself as the flame. Or if we dress up real nice and wear the costume of virtue, that God will be very pleased and he'll begin to love us. That isn't the way it operates at all. God loved us first. Man who's born blind and by an operation sees might at one time think that, oh, the sun just begins and the mountains and valleys and the rivers and streams are just appearing. They were always there. He just discovered them. Every child, when he reaches the age of 6 or 7, begins to realize that the mother loves him. No, the mother always loved him. The mother loved him before he was born. That is why, incidentally, many never realize how much their parents love them until they begin to be parents themselves. But the love is first. So religion is fundamentally a response rather than an initiative on the part of man. And that's the way nature works. Now let me show you the universe. Here's the hierarchy of creation. This is a peculiar way to draw the world and the universe. You know, sometimes when you think of the condition the world is in now, you sometimes wish that Noah had missed the boat. And for the benefit of those who think the world owes them a living, it's well to remember that the world was here before they were. Well, this is the hierarchy of creation. At the bottom are chemicals, then plants, then animals, then man. Running through the universe is this law. Nothing ever mounts to a higher level except the higher thing comes down to it. For example, if the chemicals, the phosphates, the moisture, the air, the sunshine are to be living things, the plant must come down to them. Plant must descend to them. If the plant could speak, the plant would say, unless you die to your lower existence, you cannot live in my kingdom. But if you die to this lower existence that you have, you will begin to be a living, palpitating thing. And continuing it, if, for example, the plants, mustn't forget how to spell, otherwise I get 1,000 letters. C-H-E-M-I-C-A-L-S, chemicals. If the plant is ever to live in the animal must come down to the plant. And if the animal could speak, it would say to the plant, unless you die to this lower existence that you have, unless you were torn up from the roots in the earth, unless you were ground beneath the jaws of death, you cannot live in my kingdom. But if you will surrender your lower existence and be responsive to me, then you will be not just a living thing, then you will be sentient. You can see,
You can hear. You can touch. You can move. And if the animal is ever to live in man, man must come down to the animal, lift it up, say to it, you can live a higher life, but you must be responsive, submit yourself to the knife, to the fire. And then you will be a thinking, willing creature that knows science and art, and that with a mind can scan the universe and read the secret of the stars. But shall evolution stop here in progress? Chemicals have no right to say there's no life above them. Plants have no right to say there's no life above them. So there is a higher life above man. And that higher life is God. And if man is ever to be lifted up, God in some way must come down to man. But it is not that simple. These are natures, not persons. The oxygen is not free. The cabbage has no liberty. The animal has no personality, no rights. But man has. These things can be appropriated one by the other by sheer force. But not even the God who made man free would destroy his freedom. If man is ever to be taken up, he will have to go through some process of discipline, it is true. But if he's ever to be taken up, there must be a free act on the part of man. And one day there came out from the great white throne of light an angel of light. An angel. See if you noticed how common angels are now. For Christmas, isn't it wonderful? An angel came out from the great white throne of light and descended down over the plains of Esdraelon and came to a woman kneeling in prayer. And through the angel, God said to the woman, will you give me a man? Will you give me a human nature? Speaking in the name of all humanity, will you, by an act of freedom, say, here is a man? And she said, fiat, be it done. The woman's mission is submission. Surrender. And that man could not be without love, without fire, without passion. But there are other fires than those of the flesh and other passions than those of Eros. And the fire and the passion and the love that descended upon her was the spirit and the flame and the love of God. 9 months passed. One night, there rang out over the stillness of an evening breeze, out over the white-chalked hills of Bethlehem, a cry, a gentle cry.
sea did not hear the voice, for the sea was filled with its own cry. The great ones of the earth did not hear the cry, for they could not understand how a child could be greater than a man. There were only two classes of people who heard the cry that night: shepherds and wise men. Shepherds, those who know they know nothing. Wise men, those who know they do not know everything. The very simple, the very learned, never the man with one book. Never the man who thinks that he knows. And when they came, they saw a babe whose tiny hands were not quite long enough to touch the huge heads of the cattle, and yet a babe who was steering the sun and moon and stars in their courses. Baby feet that did not walk, for they could not bear the weight of divine omnipotence. Eyes that might have read the secrets of every living heart that hour. Under that baby brow was beating a mind and an intelligence that formed the universe, along with a human intelligence that would grow in age and grace and wisdom before God and men. And this babe who was born was not a man who made himself a god, was not a man who was an ethical reformer, not just a teacher like Buddha or Socrates, not someone who would develop a consciousness of Godhead as he went on, but someone who from all eternity was God and began to be in time, the only one on earth that ever had a prehistory to be studied, not in the dust and the slime of primeval jungles, but in the bosom of an eternal Father. It shatters our proud minds to think of it. And think of that great and wise and very learned poet Francis Thompson, whose poetry staggers us with its learning. And one Christmas Eve he went into a crib near where he lived, church nearby where he lived in England. And he stood there as this great wise man and thought himself as a child and thought of God coming down to this earth as a babe. And then his mind became simple, divinely simple. And he said in his poem, "Little Jesus, wast thou shy once? And just as small as I? And how did it feel like to be out of heaven and just like me? I should think that I would cry for my house all made of sky, and that waking 'twould distress me, not an angel there to dress me. Hadst thou ever any toys? Like us little girls and boys? And didst thou play with all the angels that were not too tall, with stars for marbles? Did the things play, "Can you see me through their wings"? Did thy mother let thee spoil thy robes by playing on our soil? How nice to have them always new, 'cause in heaven 'twas quite clean blue. Did thy mother at the night kiss thee and fold thy clothes in tight. And didst thou feel quite good in bed, kissed and sweet, and thy prayers said? Oh, thou canst not have forgotten all that it feels like to be small. Then take me by the hand and walk, and listen to my baby talk. That was just his way of understanding omnipotence in bonds, the maker of the stars under the stars, and the creator of the earth, not having place whereon to lay his head. And what does it mean? Why did he come? He did not come to make us nice people. He came to make us new men, to change our natures, as everything else in nature is being changed by lifted up. Just suppose, for example, this block of marble suddenly began to bloom. Why, that would be something that does not belong to the powers or the natures or the needs of marble. Suppose these flowers suddenly began to move about from one place on the stage to another, as an animal might, seeking out first camera 1, then camera 2, and then camera 3. That would be something that certainly does not belong to the nature of flowers. And suppose a dog should suddenly walk across the stage and begin to recite Shakespeare. Well, that would be something certainly that does not belong to the nature of a dog. And suppose any of us, who are just creatures, just men, suddenly began to be children of God, so that the divine nature began to pulsate within us, so that we were lifted up by offering our human nature, as Mary offered the first human nature, so that we could in a lesser way be united with divine person, so that his truth would know all that great wisdom would begin to flood our minds, and then his will and his love would begin to possess us, and would impregnate and suffuse itself over every single love that we had. Oh, if that ever came to pass, and it does come to pass, that would be the meaning of Christmas. That's why the Son of God came to this earth, to make us other sons of God, to make us more than just human beings. It's not easy. It's very hard. You say, oh, but I'm a beast. I'm foul. I dare not be lifted up. Remember that he was laid in a manger, and his companions were beasts. That is our hope, our joy, our peace, our Merry Christmas.
It began here, in the upper room, 2,000 years ago. This is my body. This is my blood. Remember me. In a garden he prayed to his Father on a night of betrayal, torture, death, far from Galilee. When taken from his rack of torment, in a borrowed grave he lie. On the third day the angel said, "He has risen. He did not die." After sharing with friends, he rose to the Father, leaving his spirit love to guide our journey. For he is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end, together again. People of all faiths recognize Bishop Fulton J. Sheen as one of the greatest communicators of the 20th century. He was born in El Paso, Illinois, in May of 1896. As a young boy, he knew he wanted to be a priest. He served as an altar boy at St. Mary's Cathedral in Peoria, Illinois. At St. Viator College, his education and debating skills taught him the skills he used throughout his life. His unique ability at being natural and at ease in front of any audience was noted early in his ministry. He was ordained in 1919 and went on to become one of the best-known and greatly loved priests in church history. He wrote 96 books and hundreds of articles and columns. He broadcast numerous radio and TV programs. People from all faiths watched him on television because he spoke to every man. They always waited with joy for his goodbye, his blessing, God love you. It continues to give us joy and memories.
Bye now, and God love you.
Bishop Fulton J. Sheen went to be with the Lord in December of 1979. Fulton J. Sheen, requiescat in pace.